Can the government be trusted with your flood insurance? That's what we're talking about in today's video. What happens if you got left unprotected at the most vulnerable time in your life? It'd probably have a big impact on you. Probably be pretty upset, wouldn't you? That's exactly what's happening. But today we're going to show you, can you really trust the government with your flood insurance needs? Hi, I'm Chris with the Flood Insurance Guru, and more than a decade ago, I bought a property in a high-risk flood zone just like this right here. I almost lost my home because of high flood insurance premiums with the National Flood Insurance Program. I was given wrong information. I was even in the wrong flood zone by the National Flood Insurance Program. So I've been helping property owners like yourself for more than a decade with these different issues. Today we're talking about, can you really trust the government with your flood insurance? Today we're talking a little bit about availability. We're going to talk about what you can expect on rate increases. We're even going to talk about how rates are built. So we're going to get all in that in this real quick video. But before we do, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to hit share, subscribe, and like the channel below so others can find the same valuable content. So first of all, let's talk about government shutdowns. Remember, during a government shutdown, you typically do not have new flood insurance policies available. And as we shoot this, we're in peak hurricane season. This means that many property owners are being left vulnerable at the worst time of year, hurricane season. It's not like you could go down the street and get a different National Flood Insurance Program policy like you could a potential private policy. So you're being left very vulnerable. Now, what if you have one of these properties that can't get private flood insurance? You're just kind of stuck right now. What if you just got a letter from your bank stating that you're in a newly mapped area? Guess what? You can't get newly mapped rates right now. Really, those rates don't really exist anymore, but the wait period still does of that one day. You don't have access to that when you have a government shutdown. Now let's talk a little bit about private flood insurance during a government shutdown. Does private flood insurance shut down across the board like the National Flood Insurance Program does? No. Now you may have some companies that are not writing in certain areas. They cut back. You could even see some that increase rates because they just don't have the capacity. We do see that, especially this time of year with reinsurance costs and all these things. But you're not seeing it across the board. Let's look at what happened back in 2018 with the government shutdown of 35 days, where people did not have availability of federal flood insurance for almost 45 days. That's pretty big on home loan closings, leaving people almost stranded on not knowing what to do there. And back then, most private flood insurance was not acceptable on government loans. The good news is in 2025, because of HUD passing a law in 2022, private flood insurance is acceptable on USDA and VA and all these different types of loans, as long as it meets certain conditions. So you need to understand that as a property owner. You need to understand that you don't necessarily just have to be stuck here. However, you do want to pay attention to pricing. Still get a price from the National Flood Insurance Program. Get a price from their private flood insurance. And ask your private flood insurance company this: is there a minimum earned premium here? Try to go with a company that does not have a minimum earned premium. That way, if you do want to cancel it and go back to the National Flood Insurance Program when things open back up, if you choose to do so, you absolutely could. We just helped a homeowner do this last week. So these are some things you want to ask when it comes to this government shutdown. And can you really trust the government? Now let's talk about rate increases. With the National Flood Insurance Program, typically they could only increase your rates up to 18% on a primary residence each year and up to 25%. Now, if you've had more than 2 claims in a 3-year period, after 2021, there are some loopholes there to see what could happen with renewals. With private companies can really increase your rates any way they want there because they're a private company. On average, we probably see private companies increasing rates sometimes 30 to 40%. We see some non-renewing. You're typically not going to have that with the National Flood Insurance Program. Now let's talk about how rates are built. And a lot of times, private flood insurance companies will tell you exactly how rates are built. The problem is the National Flood Insurance Program, since Risk Rating 2.0 came out, they're not very transparent with us. They just told us that a bunch of stuff gets thrown into a risk pool to determine your rate. It used to be that you would have these tables. You knew your flood zone had an impact. Remember, flood zones no longer impact your rates with the National Flood Insurance Program. Now things like distance to water, the type of flooding frequency, replacement cost of your property, the elevation of your property, all these things go into a pool to determine your rates. The problem is we don't have that table, so we can't, as insurance agents, guide customers the best we used to be able to. However, in helping thousands of people across the country with flood insurance, I can tell you the top two factors we see having the biggest impact on national flood insurance program rates, that is replacement cost and distance to water, especially a floodway. Remember, a floodway would be like the water source right here. If I had like a lake or a pond right here, that edge there is going to be considered a floodway. You want to avoid those because typically most private flood insurance companies won't write policies there, and the National Flood Insurance Program is going to hit you pretty hard on rates. So I want to say thank you for watching today's video on can we really trust the government with our flood insurance? I'm Chris with the Flood Insurance Guru. Remember, everybody's in a flood zone. Thank you.